Can you beat Crash Bandicoot 2 if every crate is a TNT? Probably not. I don't know that for sure though, I haven't investigated it properly, but people ask me that question quite a lot these days, and variations upon it involving different types of crates and different Crash Bandicoot games. I can't imagine why that is. I'm not really planning to look into that kind of thing again anytime soon, but I have been experimenting in various ways with the crates in the Sane Trilogy for many years now. I feel like I must have learned a few interesting things in that time, and people do constantly ask me about this stuff. So, you know what? Today I'm just going to talk for a bit about the boxes of the Sane Trilogy and share some of the weird little things I found over the years. And even if we don't answer the question of can you beat any of these games if every crate is a TNT, we might discover what's different about how TNTs work compared to Nitro crates that makes it a more complicated challenge to embark on. But let's start with the basics. What exactly are the crates in the Sane Trilogy? Well, almost every crate you see when you're playing a level in these remakes of Crash 1, 2 and 3 is made up of two main components. One of them is a sort of template object, and one of them is a spawn point. So for example, the first crates you see in the first level of the first game are two bounce crates and one random crate. But each of these boxes is essentially just a set of coordinates that references one of the template objects that's listed in the crates file for this level. They each have a bit of code that says spawn this type of crate at this location. And then it's those templates that do most of the heavy lifting in determining the behavior of these. Stuff like what model to use, what collectibles to give, and how many of them, and various other properties relevant to that type of crate. The template object that the bounce crates use is where it's set that you can jump on them 5 times before they break. So if you wanted them to work the way they did in the original version of Crash 1, you can change that 5 to a 10 in the code, and then every bounce crate in the level will now let you bounce 10 times because they all point to that same template. And then you could modify the settings of this random crate spawn point to load a bounce crate instead, and then you'd have 3 copies of that bounce crate template here. So for every different type of crate that exists in this level, the crates file for the level includes a template object for that type. Here is a list of every one of those templates that exists in the relevant file for Insanity Beach, which is where I am now. You can see there's actually 2 different types of random here. The one at the start of the level uses the random extra life template, which is why it gives you a 1-up the first time you break it, while all the other random crates just give you Wumpa Fruit every time. Because these templates are where the collectibles are defined, crates that look the same but contain different things use different templates. But what might be more interesting about this list is the inclusion of my old friend, the Nitro crate. Normally, there are never any Nitro crates in any of the Crash 1 levels. They weren't invented until the second game, but if you go through the files of the Sane Trilogy, you'll quickly realise that every level in the game, at least the ones that contain crates, includes the template for a Nitro, regardless of whether or not they ever appear in that level. And that's the basic explanation for why it's simpler to turn every crate in the whole game into a Nitro than to do it with TNTs. Nitros are already always there, and it's just a case of telling every crate spawner to use that template. But why does every level have Nitros hidden inside it like this? Well, there's other items in this list that might give you a clue. The 1, 2 and 3 second time crates that you usually only see during time trials also exist in every level. If you load them into normal gameplay, there's nothing special about them. They just act the same as basic crates, but they are included in every level for the same reason that Nitros are. Because yes, the main thing that's specified in the code for each individual crate is what should be spawning at that position, but there are a few other settings, like whether that particular instance of that template should be subject to gravity if boxes below it get broken, and whether or not it's part of a bonus round, and what should happen to that crate during a time trial. And even though the way these spawn points work mean they can basically load in any object from any file, from any level, anywhere in the game, for some reason, time trials are handled differently. And in every level, there's a set list of 8 different options for what can happen to a crate when a time trial is activated that is identical every time. And because it's the same list every time, every template that might be needed to make the time trial work properly is included in the file, even if it's never used. The Nitro crate is one of the crate types available in time trials, so it's in that list, and therefore its template is included in every level. And that is why turning every crate in the game into a Nitro is a pretty straightforward process. There is still something weird about that though. You might already know this if you're an avid time trialist. I personally had to write some code to double check it, but there doesn't appear to actually be any reason for Nitros to be in that list in the first place. Because in the Sane Trilogy, every Nitro you ever come across during every time trial was always a Nitro by default anyway. There aren't any instances in Crash 1, 2 and 3 of some other kind of crate turning into a Nitro when you start a time trial. The Nitro option is only ever used by crates that are always Nitros, which is completely unnecessary when that situation is already covered by the flag to leave them unchanged. That might also be the case with iron crates too, but I don't think there's that much potential in can you beat Crash Bandicoot if every crate is a block of impassable, unmovable, solid metal. After all, iron crates are mostly just used as static platforms, no different to any other bits of scenery you can stand on. In fact, in some levels they are just scenery that uses the same model as an iron crate. There are some pieces of scenery that use the Nitro crate model too. The fake Nitros in Behaving aren't any kind of special teleporters or anything. The teleport trigger is a separate entity that can be moved around independently, so they're also just static models. You could use any crate model as a piece of scenery if you wanted to, in the same way that you can make real crates use any model. Like I said, that's defined as part of the template object. And okay, for gameplay purposes, it probably is best most of the time to leave them looking like crates. But I quite like how it looks if you set some crates to use these prototype models that you can still find in the game's main menu screen. But yeah, when they're not fake, iron crates are a very easy way to quickly add platforms to a level. So that'll be why they use so much in bonus levels, which are a lot more focused on platforming gameplay than they are on visuals. And that's true to such an extent, I only realised this very recently, that in a few of the more difficult bonus rounds, there is a whole secret floor made up of hidden iron crates that presumably was used by the developers during testing because they got sick of falling to their deaths. What does that mean though? How are they hidden exactly? Why don't you see these when you play these levels normally? Well, it's for the same reason that you don't see all of those actual template objects in the level. They're all still there, they've just had their own spawn property disabled. There are quite a few things like that in the game that exist in the levels, but that have been switched off like that. There's a lot of hidden prototype level geometry. Maybe this is stuff from the original PS1 games that's been used as a guide. Maybe it's original white box models made for this game. I don't know what it is, but hey, look at this cute little boat that's secretly sailing around the Crash 1 map screen. That's fun, isn't it? But out of all the objects you can interact with that have been disabled, one of the most interesting, I think, is this mysterious key at the end of the Great Hall. The Great Hall is, of course, the last level of Crash 1 before you face the final boss, and you can only reach this exit if you've collected all the gems. This is where you access the 100% ending of the game. Normally, you only find keys like this at the end of the Cortex bonus rounds, and they unlock the 2 extra levels in Crash 1. This one never existed in the original game, and my theory was always that at one point this was going to be how you unlocked Stormy Ascent, the level they brought back as DLC for this game after it was deemed too hard to keep in the PS1 version. I guess maybe either someone decided that needing to beat the game to 100% before you could play that level was too steep a requirement, or maybe Activision just remembered that they were Activision and realised they could charge money for it instead. I don't know, but when it comes to the crates, apart from those cheaty iron boxes in the bonus levels, the only other secrets of any real significance are the many extra hidden checkpoints that are scattered around the trilogy, which again would have made playtesting a lot easier for the developers. My favourite example of that might be Castle Machinery, which has a total of 8 hidden checkpoints in it. And if you're curious, reactivating these does add them to the level's crate total. If you switch them back on, you'll then need to break them all to get the gem. That's one nice thing about how the game works when you get into making custom levels. The crate count is calculated automatically, so you don't ever have to keep track of any boxes you add or remove. Also, a couple of levels before Castle Machinery, Fumbling in the Dark, there's bizarrely an iron checkpoint floating in the void outside the level. That one hasn't even been turned off, but I suppose the level's dark enough that it doesn't need to be, really. But wait a minute, if you can re-enable all of these things that have been disabled, and they were disabled in the same way that all the template objects are hidden, can you also re-enable those hidden templates? Well, yeah. Here is the template object of an Aku Aku box, after it's been set to actually spawn in this level. But in this case, the crate count hasn't increased from the usual number of 49, because the code that handles that is attached to the spawners rather than the template. And this is probably something you'd never want to do, because now that this template physically exists here, it can be broken, and then if you die, it won't respawn. And the Aku Aku crate that's supposed to be here has disappeared. I don't know if that's like you destroy the template so there isn't anything that can be replicated here anymore, or if it is still spawning, but it's copying the current state of that template, so it's pre-broken. Whatever the case, if you do this, all 3 of the Aku Aku crates that are supposed to be in this level will be deleted forever until you restart the level. And guess what? You can do exactly the same thing with enemies. So if I re-enable the template for this crab and kill that version of him and die, the crab that's normally there is also gone. That's because, generally speaking, enemies work using the same template/spawner system that crates use. As with anything in this game, there are exceptions to the norm. Just like there are some crate spawners that have been switched off, there are crate templates that have been switched on. Like this iron arrow in the bonus round of the High Road. This is just the template object for that type of crate. This one is, however, one of the crates that is not the same as it was in the original version of the game. If you play Crash 1 on PS1, this is a wooden arrow crate instead, and they made it metal for the remake because you now need to break all of the bonus boxes to get 100%, and the way it was before would have made it a little bit awkward to do that. The weird way that it's done here though does make me wonder if it was a bit of a last minute change. Like, it took them a bit longer than it should have done to realise it was going to be a problem. There's also a place where sort of the opposite thing has been done. There were, in the PS1 version of Crash 2, 2 towers of 4 iron crates each in the bonus round of Behaving. In the Sane Trilogy, the bottoms of those towers were changed to nitros, but specifically they use a template called Flying Nitro Crate, which is what's used in the plane level Rings of Power. Flying nitros are fixed in place, they don't jump up and down, that's why they work well for the flying levels. And if you change these ones into normal nitros like the ones next to them, you can kind of see why they made that decision. But it does seem like, again, that might have been a change that was made fairly late in the day. Anyway, do you know what my favourite variety of iron crate is? No, it's not this guy, it's the iron switch crate. With a switch crate, most of the important work is actually done by that individual crate, the spawner. I guess otherwise every switch in a level would need its own template. Instead, they all just reference the same template. What that means though is you can change which template they use, like with any other crate, and have them still function in the same way. So if you modify a switch to use the template for a basic crate, when you break it, whatever the switch normally does will still happen. I have demonstrated that before, but you can also change them into collectibles, like Wumpa Fruit or 1-ups, and when you pick them up, the switch will still activate. You could even do something like use that pointless key object from earlier as a switch that opens a door when you collect it. Wow! And again, enemies do tend to be spawned using the same method as crates, so you can turn crates, including switch crates, into crabs if you want to, but then killing the enemy won't activate the switch. As far as I know, that only works with crates and collectibles. There is still a way to trigger a switch when you kill something though, because as I mentioned earlier, one of the rules set by a template object is the collectibles that it contains. So that is something you can change. You can even use more crates as the collectibles stored inside crates. and you can change it for enemies too, because all enemies do have collectibles hidden inside them. It's just that you'd usually only see them when you hit an enemy with another enemy, because that gives you Wumpa Fruit. But if you change the properties of this crab so that it always drops its collectible when it's killed, and then turn its collectible into, for example, an explosive mine, it may be a roundabout way of doing it, but it is possible to make switches activate after you kill an enemy. And of course, the things that appear when a switch is activated don't have to be crates. In most cases, even though you can tell crates to use any kind of template object, there isn't that much point in using something other than a crate. But with outline crates, having the option to spawn other stuff means you can have basically anything happen when you hit a switch. I think there's only one level in the trilogy where a switch makes things other than boxes appear. There are some lily pads in Up the Creek that are spawned in that way, but you can take any outline crate you want and point it to any template you want. And that isn't limited to physical objects, by the way. Any type of entity in the game can be used as a template. So it's possible to do something like make a cutscene play when a switch is activated, or change the size of the player character by making outline crates spawn the entities that trigger those things. Or, because anything can be used as a template, you can even use other crate spawners as templates, which means you can actually load additional crates into the level at runtime, and doing that will increase the crate total for the level while you're playing it, which is kind of bonkers. If you think it's annoying to get to the end of a long Crash 4 level to discover you've missed a couple of boxes, just be grateful they never start adding in new boxes halfway through. The game does slightly freak out about doing that though. This error message is what happens if you ever give two crates identical coordinates. And when an outline crate spawns a copy of an existing crate at its location when the switch is triggered, that is two crates with identical coordinates. There are ways to get around that, but I think it's always interesting to see a glimpse of some debug stuff like this. I don't know how many extra boxes it's theoretically possible to add to a level while the game is running, but if you turn a normal switch into a reusable switch crate, something that was intended to only be used for opening doors in one specific level, every time you hit it, that number will keep increasing. Because with a reusable switch, every time it's triggered, it respawns everything it spawned before, even if that includes crates you've already broken. But that error about crates in the same position is still happening behind the scenes, so it's probably not a great idea to do that. I think it'd be much safer to load extra crates into a level using one of the many other methods of spawning stuff in, like using the bazooka, or a pirate cannon, or one of those magic buttons from the Egypt levels. But let's not get too distracted by those things, because I am trying to focus on crates here. So let's look at another special type of crate that can also add new stuff into a level and take it away again. The slot machine crate is kind of unique in that there is no such thing as a template object for a slot machine crate. Instead, slot crates contain a list of templates, and then the objects in that list are what it swaps between. And it's done in a bit of an odd way. Every slot crate in the entire game uses exactly the same list. It's always empty, random, extra life, Aku Aku, and TNT. And to get different combinations out of that, there's a separate list of ones and zeros to say which of those slots is actually active. So there's some similarity there to how the time trials work, just as every level in the game includes the Nitro template, because that's one of the options for time trial crates. Every level that uses slot machine crates includes the TNT template, because one of the slots is always a TNT, it's just not always active. But the difference between this and time trials is that the items in that list aren't the only options. You can use whatever 5 templates you want for slot crates. So that could be different types of crates, but it could also be enemies or platforms. With a little bit of tweaking, you could use slot machine crates to do something like recreate the intermittently appearing and disappearing platforms from Twinsanity. Speaking of Twinsanity, I've previously made my own version of that game's detonator crates in the Sane Trilogy by using a special kind of crate only found in one level. At the end of the Lost City, there are 2 outline crates that break automatically after you spawn them in. I'm pretty sure that's the only time that ever happens in the whole franchise, because why not? This is another example of the code that makes these different being part of the spawners rather than the templates. So whatever template you set these to, as long as they're still crates, they will break as soon as the switch is activated. And if they're explosive crates like nitros or TNTs or big TNTs, they will explode when that happens, which is how I use them to make detonators. And outline crates don't have to start out as outline crates. If you set the initial template and the post-activation template to the same type of crate, you get the illusion that a normal box is being broken without you touching it. The other place in the game where crates break themselves without being hit by anything is in the polar levels. Instead of starting to count down when you jump on them, because you can't do that while you're riding polar, all the TNTs in these levels are activated when you pass through invisible trigger zones that are positioned so you reach them about 3 seconds before you get to the TNTs. So that's another way to do remote detonations, if you want to keep the countdown instead of having an instant explosion, although it will still be instant if you change them to nitros. Unlike the Lost City crates, this does only work with explosives, but I quite like the idea of extra unstable nitros that will blow just from getting a little bit too close to them. Some of the other special crates that appear in riding or vehicle levels are the balloon crates from the flying levels. What's different about these is that each of them isn't just a spawn point for a template, which is the usual system. These things are instead prefabs, a collection of objects grouped together under a single entity. That's how the balloon is connected to the crate and why the crate is able to fall when the balloon is popped. You don't need a plane or bullets to pop them though, any contact will do it. And even though it's inside a prefab, the actual crate element of these is the standard spawn this template here kind of situation. Set that to any crate template you want and it will always fall when the balloon is popped, and it will always break when it hits the ground. That even works for iron crates, unless you get in the way. So that's one way to have crates raining down from the sky without needing to worry about breaking other crates underneath them first. There's also a few ways that crates can move around other than by gravity. Most of the time, if you see crates bobbing up and down in water, that's just because they have a movement property to them that's been configured to create the effect of floating. In the Crash 2 river levels, that property is part of the spawners, which means you can set their templates to any kind of crate and it will look as if it's floating. But in the Crash 3 level Tomb Wader, it's controlled by the templates instead. So you can only have crates rising and falling with the water in that level if a flood version of that template exists. There's also no connection between the water hazards in Tomb Wader and the crates. They've both been set to move up and down at the same rate, but they aren't interacting with each other in any way, and changing how the water moves will not affect the crates or the platforms that also rise and fall. The game's engine is capable of doing that though, because the water crates in the jet ski levels do properly float. They and a few other objects like the buoys that mark the borders of those levels will always sit on top of the surface of the ocean. You can raise them up into the sky, change the behaviour of the waves, change the position of the sea. Those objects will always drop down to the water and stay floating on top of it. And it's a similar situation to those river levels. Any template these are set to will float in the same way. Crates, enemies, platforms, whatever you want. And with certain objects, like these floating dingo dials, you'll get this sort of targeting reticle appear that makes it look like you should be able to shoot some kind of homing missile towards them. Which is weird because you wouldn't normally have any kind of projectiles in these levels, or in the level that Dingo Dial comes from. But if you cheat a little bit to equip the bazooka while you're riding a jet ski, you can see your shots do indeed turn into homing wampers that head straight for the target. And if you think that's strange, even with objects that don't show that target, using the bazooka on the jet ski still turns it into some kind of OP heat-seeking weapon. Like, it can find and break any crates in your vicinity as well, without needing to aim at all. But I've probably taken us on enough tangents already, and if I'm ever going to try to explain why this is a thing, I may save it for another time. Because it was the crates that I wanted to concentrate on here, and I think I've covered the important stuff pretty well by now. So I hope that for anyone who's been curious about some of the ways you can mess with the boxes in this game, you've learned something at least. If you're one of the people who's waiting for my level editor, then hopefully this will have given you some ideas for interesting things you could try experimenting with when the time comes. That project has continued to eat up sickeningly close to 100% of my free time recently, and I am getting closer with it every day. But if you really can't wait to play around with level modding, then everything I've talked about here you can already tinker with just using the Alchemist tool I released like a couple of years ago. Here's where the coordinates for crates are, here's where you can change the template they use, and here is where I'm ending this. Goodbye.